Today, we're going to get into a critical topic, the isolation that comes with narcissistic abuse and why connection is just so very important to healing. This is part one of a two-part episode because there's so much to unpack here. I just don't want to rush it. Hi, I'm Kyle Hackley, attorney and author of Undercurrent, where we follow Annie's journey through narcissistic abuse and beyond. While Annie's story takes us through our conversations, remember, she's not just one person. Annie represents anyone who has lived through narcissistic abuse. So let's start with part one of why the feeling of isolation is so common and how the narcissist wants you to feel that way and what you can do about it. First, we need to understand that one of the most powerful tools in the narcissist's arsenal is isolation. It doesn't always happen overnight. At first, it might look like they're protecting you, wanting more of your time, making you feel special, but gradually they start cutting you off from friends, family, co-workers, anyone who might give you a different perspective. And once you're isolated, the self-doubt creeps in. You start to question yourself. Your confidence erodes. And before you know it, you start relying on the narcissist as your only source of truth. That's the trap. And the longer you're in it, the harder it feels to reach out for help. Because by then, you might begin to believe that no one will understand, or worse, that they're going to see you as the problem. I want to share a story, one that I think many of you might recognize either in your own life or in someone you know. I had a friend, we'll call her Sarah. When Sarah first got married, she was a gregarious social woman with a strong circle of friends. Her husband didn't seem to mind she was going out at first. In fact, in the beginning, he even encouraged it. But as time went on, and fairly quickly, actually, things started to shift. Each time Sarah came home from being with the girls, whether it was a shopping trip, out for coffee, or some other harmless event, her husband was moody, withdrawn, and sometimes passive-aggressive. He might sigh or complain, "You were gone for so long," or "I just don't know why you need to be with those people so much." At first, she brushed it off, but it began to wear on her. And then, when she was out, the messages would start. "Where are you? Who are you with?" Sometimes she swore she saw a car following her in the distance. But when she asked, of course he denied it. "You're imagining things. Don't be so dramatic." Well, you can probably guess what Sarah started doing, or should I say, stopped doing. Little by little, she stopped going out. It wasn't worth the guilt, the arguments, and the tension when she got home. And by their first wedding anniversary, she realized she had virtually no friends. The people she once called her closest confidants had stopped calling. Not because they didn't care, but because Sarah was just never available. And when she was distracted, anxious, and just not herself anymore. So here's the thing. Sarah didn't even see it happening, because that's exactly how isolation works. It's not a cage slammed shut. It's a slow, silent closing of the door. A barely noticeable shift at first. A comment that makes you second guess yourself. A guilt trip that makes you cancel your plans. A cold shoulder that punishes you for having your own life. And then one day you look around, you're standing in a room all by yourself. You don't even know how you got there. And Sarah's story isn't unique. This is how it happens over and over. It starts small. A sigh, a subtle eye roll, a lingering silence that makes you think you've done something wrong. Then it escalates, a disapproving remark here, a passive-aggressive jab there, until you find yourself pulling away without even realizing it. You stop reaching out to your friends. You make excuses. You shrink. Until suddenly you wake up one day and realize, I have no one. And that's exactly where the narcissist wants you. Because when you are isolated, when you have no one to remind you of who you really are, no one to say, hey, this isn't normal, you are much easier to control. And that's when the real damage begins. One of the hardest things about narcissistic abuse is that it creates deep loneliness. And this can happen even when you're surrounded by people. You could be sitting in a crowded room at a family dinner, at work, at even a social event. Yet you feel completely alone, because this kind of isolation isn't just about physical separation. It's about emotional separation. You feel like no one would believe you if you told them. And if you ever did try to explain, you might be met with, oh, I'm sure they didn't mean it that way, or you're overthinking it. You know they love you. And that dismissal only adds to your isolation, because when people around you don't see it, when they don't understand it, it reinforces what the narcissist has been making you feel all along, that maybe it's just you. And of course, the narcissist wants it this way, because when you're alone with no one to validate your experience, no one to challenge their version of reality, you are easy to control. So what do? How do you break free from this isolation when it just feels so impossible? Sarah, my friend, started small with just one small, safe connection. For you, it might be one person you trust. It might be an online support group. It might be something as simple as listening to a podcast like this, just to remind yourself that what you are feeling is real. Validation is a critical first step. When someone hears your story and says, believe you, like a crack of light coming through a dark room, that's when you start realizing you're not crazy. You never were. If you're listening to this and you're in that lonely self-doubt stage, I want you to know you are not alone, and you don't have to do this alone. In our next episode, part 2, we're going to talk about what happens after you realize the truth. We're going to talk about rebuilding trust, not just in others, but in yourself, and how to start finding safe places where you can start to heal. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in connection. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Share them in comments or reach out to me on my email, because that's why AreYouAnnie exists. When you share your story, you're not just speaking for yourself, you're lighting the way for someone else. AreYouAnnie is for anyone who needs validation and support. It's like walking through fire to reach the other side of narcissistic abuse. And we understand that. It's about reclaiming the pieces of who you are and stepping back into your power. If you haven't already, you mind hitting subscribe or the like button on this episode if you got something out of it. I truly believe that when you do that, we can help others find us. Now, I may not know you personally, but I think I know your story because I know Annie's story. The details, of course, are always going to be different, but the patterns are the same. If you see yourself in Annie's journey, I want you to know that you are not alone. And as always, I want you to know that you're not just a survivor. You are a warrior against narcissistic abuse. You are stronger than you know. And I want you to be tenacious and never give up on what you believe in. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in part 2. Bye for now.